At this point, you have put all of this work into gathering evidence and devising a position on the prompt. You want your ideas to be clear, and you want the reader to walk away convinced of your arguments. This is where introductions and conclusions come in. This is the beginning and end of your paper that will really hit home for the reader. So what makes a strong introduction or conclusion? Well, we can break these paragraphs down into their basic elements. On the left, we have the basic elements of an introduction: a hook sentence, an introduction to the literature or sources, an acknowledgement of the different views and perspectives on the issue, your thesis statement, and an outline of the criteria, or the main arguments. On the right, we have the basic elements of a conclusion: a transition sentence that signals the end of the paper, a restatement of the thesis statement, a reminder to the reader of how the criteria have created a sound argument or thesis statement, transition sentence that states why the issue is of ongoing importance. You'll probably notice that these paragraphs are the inverse of each other. So the introduction follows the hook sentence to the criteria, and the conclusion starts with the criteria and ends with a transition sentence. This is because we are stating the same information and making sure that the reader is clear on the main idea of our essay. The first element that we want to include in our introduction or conclusion is a hook sentence or a transition sentence. A good hook sentence connects the topic or argument to our overall position. We are leading the reader away from what we have just discussed and into our position. An example of a good hook sentence for an introduction is on the top left. Media has exposed society to superheroes in increasing amounts since the dawn of Marvel and DC. In this example, the writer has drawn the reader into the topic of the role of superheroes in society by discussing why this topic may be important to them. A weak hook sentence on the bottom left: have you ever wondered why superheroes are increasingly popular these days? Is a rhetorical question and may lead the reader to think about the popularity of superheroes rather than of the role of superheroes in society. The reader could potentially go anywhere with this question. For conclusions, the transition sentence should lead the reader from the final argument back to the thesis statement. A good transition sentence is on the top right. Ultimately, superheroes have been shown to be vital assets to society through the positive roles that they play. In this example, the writer has summarized the main idea of the arguments and has led back to the topic of the role of superheroes in society. Compared to this transition sentence, the bottom left sentence seems very weak. In conclusion, superheroes are positive members of society. This is a very basic summary of the position with no connection to the arguments the writer has just made in the paper. Strong hook and transition sentence make a world of difference between an excellent or proficient paper and a satisfactory or limited paper. It is really worth it to write effective hooks and transitions. Here are some common don'ts when writing an introduction or conclusion, hook or transition sentence. The first is do not include quotes. Often the quote is not exactly what we want to say, and a lot of explanation needs to be put in for the reader to understand the connection we have made. We want our writing to be the focus rather than someone else's opinion. The second is not to have any rhetorical questions. We do not want the reader to make their own conclusions. We are telling them exactly what we want them to think. After all, this is our argumentative paper. The third is do not include definitions or common knowledge. Generally, anyone who is reading your paper knows the same content as you, because either they're your teacher or they're your peer. It is not important to define or outline common terms as they are clear prior to reading your paper. The fourth is not to say I or use the first person. I know this is tempting because it is your position, but truly an argumentative paper is not your own opinion. It is rather a judgment that you have made based on evidence. Opinions can be subjective, but a position is not. And lastly, do not include any new profound connections. What I mean by this is leaving off your paper with a generalized statement about the world or humanity or any related topic to the prompt. Anything that has not been supported by evidence at this point in your paper cannot be included in the conclusion. No new information should be presented at this time. Another important element is an acknowledgement of different views and perspectives in your introduction and conclusion. In English class, you have read many texts that may have differing perspectives, and it is important to acknowledge them to demonstrate your understanding of the range of texts you have read. In social studies, you are required to analyze the prompt and discuss the various individuals and groups that may disagree or agree with the prompt. Demonstrate your knowledge of the various views on the topic. For example, our topic on superheroes has many different perspectives. They are all valid and should be acknowledged even if we do not agree with them. They may disagree with the prompt for a variety of reasons, including superheroes have flaws as well as powers. Some people might disagree with Stan Lee in that superheroes have questionable morals. Or those that might disagree are the bystanders whose property or lives are destroyed in the aftermath of a battle between heroes and villains. As you can see, they are valid and may add to our paper if we choose to counter-argue these views. The main role that an introduction or conclusion has is to present to the reader or remind them of the thesis statement and criteria. It is crucial that both of these are clearly identifiable and have not been changed from the process work you've done so far. Your teacher has given you feedback and has approved your thesis and criteria. Make sure that these are front and center for the reader. Lastly, I will remind you again that you should always use third person and present your position objectively. Remember that your introduction and conclusion are the bread of your paper. They hold all of your arguments and evidence together in a nice package for your reader to be fully convinced of your position.